All right, very last piece of information for today. We're going to need to discuss onclick attributes on HTML elements. Onclick attributes on HTML elements. So imagine we're dealing with an array of student objects here, and we actually want to look up one of these students. And when we find them, we want to display their name, score, and enrollment status. Okay, so in order to create an application that will allow us to look up students, we need some place to type in some kind of identifier, probably the student's name in our case. So in HTML, I'm going to create an input, text input. I'm going to give it an ID of student name. Keep it simple. And I'm going to create a button for submitting that information. Type equals button, submit. Okay. Now, we need something to happen when I click this button. We need a function to run. In order to do that, we can do so with an onclick attribute. Onclick. I'm not going to put anything in these quotation marks just yet. Let's go back into our JavaScript and start setting up our data, start setting up our function. Okay? This ID has, this input has an ID of student name, so we can easily target that. Let's go ahead and set up a variable for it. Var input equals document.get element by ID. That's not right. Student name. Okay. Now let's see what the input variable is. Great. The input variable is the input element, which is great. But what do we actually need from the input element? What we're actually going to need to pull from it is whatever a user types in here. Like if a user types in Matt, we want to be able to get Matt. But input alone is not going to do that. So let's see what happens if I write input while Matt is typed in to the element. What happens if I write input dot inner text? Nope. That'd be a good guess, but doesn't work. What about input dot text content? Also a good guess, also doesn't work. There's a special property unique to elements like inputs, elements which a user can type into or check, like a checkbox, or somehow edit in some way. And that property is called value. If I type in input.value, that will return exactly what a user has typed into the input element. Okay, so I can change this to something entirely different. Run the same line of code again, input.value, and it will return to me a completely different string. The value property of an input element is the text which a user has typed into that input element. The value property of an input element is the text which a user has typed into that element. Okay? I hope that makes sense. So, now that we have our hook to easily grab our input, let's create a function, the function that will run on the click of our button, and we'll call this function getInfo. Okay, and again, this is the basic function syntax. But now that we've declared our function, let's not forget to go back into our HTML, find our onclick attribute, and write getInfo in here. We do need these parentheses here. These parentheses which indicate that it's a function and which cause that function to be invoked. What's going to happen is when you click on this button element, when you click on this button, the getInfo function will be invoked. So we need this function to actually loop through the array, find the correct student, and return their information. Okay, so first things first, we want to loop through the array and see if what a user has typed into the input matches the name property of one of these student objects. If the user typed in Courtney, we want the function to return Courtney's name, score, and enrollment status. If the user typed in Evan, we want the function to return Evan's name, score, and enrollment status. If the user typed in Kingsley Papa Giorgio, there is no student with that name, so maybe we wanted to do something else entirely there. But first thing we need to do, loop through our array of students. And inside of our loop, we're going to check if what a user typed in matches the name property of the given student at the given index. That's going to look like this. If input.value equals students at the I index dot name, then we found a match. That's what that means. That's what that means. Okay? So when I is 0, we're going to check is the value of the input equal to student0.name. Is it equal to Evan? If it's not, we're going to add 1 to I. And is the input value equal to students1.name? Is it equal to Matt? If it's not, we're going to add 1 to I. And is input value equal to students2.name? Is it equal to Courtney? Okay, that's how this is going to work. And if we never find a match, we might want to do something else like alert student not found. Does that make sense? There is a problem here. The problem is with this logic, this alert student not found is going to run every time there's not a match, which is to say, even if you write Courtney into the input field, it's going to first check is the input value equal to Evan? No, so you get an alert, student not found. Add 1 to I, is it equal to Matt? No, you get an alert, student not found. Is it equal to Courtney? Yes, success. In fact, let's just write a console log in here. Success. And try this out. Reload. I'm going to type in Courtney. I hit submit. Student not found. Student not found. Success. Oh, careful. I have a typo in my for loop. I is less than students.length. There we go. Okay, so that's something we need to take care of. We don't actually want this alert to be in our else statement. What we really want is for that alert to be outside of our for loop. And if we find a match, we want to break our function. Okay, just like we write break for a loop, return will actually break out of this function. Okay, break will break a for loop. Return will break a function. So if we successfully find a match, we're going to return, and this alert will never run. If the alert is confusing to you right now, don't worry about it too much right now. It's not central. It's not the most important piece. What is the most important piece is this if condition. This if condition. Okay, so assuming we find a match, the user has actually typed in the name of a student in this list, we want to then display their information. So let's go ahead and create an element, actually 3 elements, where we can display their information. I'm going to write an H1 with an ID of name. I'm going to write an H3 with an ID of score. And I'm going to write an H4 with an ID of enrolled. And once more, let's set up some variables for all of these elements, which we are going to need to select. var myh1 equals document.get element by ID name. var myh3 equals document.get element by ID score. And var myh4 equals document.get element by ID enrolled. Okay, now we have the shorthand, we have the variables for all these elements we want to target. And instead of this console log, let's instead set myh1.innerText equal to students I.name when we find a match. And when we find a match, let's set myh3.innerText equal to students I.score when we find a match. And when we find a match, let's set myh4.innerText equal to, and let's concatenate a little bit, enrolled plus students I dot is enrolled. Okay, so for the time being, if you want to just forget about that alert, forget about that return, that's fine. I'll come back to it in a minute. But this is our function. We run a for loop that loops through our array of student objects and checks the name property of each student object against what a user typed into the input field. And if and only if it finds a match, it then updates the inner text of these three elements in our HTML to contain the independent properties of that student object. Okay, if it finds a match with students1.name, then you're going to get students1.name in the myh3, students1.score in myh3, students1.isenrolled in myh4. Let's see it in action. Reload. I'm going to type in Matt. There we go. Matt, 97, enrolled, true. What about Evan? Evan, 94, enrolled, false. How about Courtney? Courtney, 100, enrolled, true. Let's add our alert back in. Outside of the for loop, alert, student not found. Outside of the for loop, just like that. Okay, I've added the alert back in, and look what happens if I type in Sam. Student not found. Good. That's what we'd expect, right? But what happens when I type in Evan now? Student not found, and yet then it runs the code. That's because currently both of these things are happening. Because I typed in Evan, the if condition is returning true, so all this code is running. But then when it finishes the loop, it just keeps going, and it finds this alert. It gives us an alert. That's why, if the condition is met, if we find a match, that's why we want that return. What that is going to do is prevent the alert from running if we find a match. But it will still run if we don't. Okay, so the keys here, once more, looping through an array of objects. Also, the onclick function on the button, the onclick attribute on the button in our HTML to invoke a function defined in our JavaScript on click. When you click on the button, get info, the function is invoked. Then we define that function, and in the function we're running a for loop to loop through an array of objects, and we're checking the value, the dot value, the value property of an input element against the name property of every student in the students array. If there is a match, we update these 3 HTML elements to display the information about that student. And we return, break the function. If there is not a match, this code never executes. We hit this alert that says student not found, and we're done. Okay, these are the exact same principles you will have to use in your project this week. So take the opportunity to get familiar with them. Practice this. Everything that you see me do it again. Run through the videos again. Code along with them again. Pause the videos and code it on your own. Try to solve these problems on your own using my videos as reference. Okay, you're going to need to do this on your own in a much bigger way for your weekly project. Just don't forget the takeaways from this final video. OnClick attribute to invoke a function from HTML. .value property to pull the text which a user has typed into an input field and access it as a string in your JavaScript. Okay? I hope that was helpful. Please reach out to your mentors or to me or to anyone else on the Codify staff if you have any questions. This is a pretty breakneck week. So, head down and power through. Thanks, guys.